You think because you say nothing, you are strong?
War is terrible, but sometimes the games are really good. Today in gameranx, we're talking about some of the best World War I and World War II games. Starting off at number 15, we have Battalion 1944, which is a crowd-funded multiplayer World War II shooter. This one is fairly new, coming out in 2019. In a world filled with mostly modern-day shooters, this one was a breath of fresh air. It's a bit unpolished, and obviously it isn't going to control like a AAA shooter, but it does a great job at scratching that nostalgia itch, making you think back to those late nights you stayed up playing Call of Duty or Battlefield 1942. It moves pretty fast too, similarly to CSGO, honestly. There's also a really fun progression system, one that's in it for the player and not trying to make a quick buck off of you. So if you're an older Call of Duty player, this is right up your alley if you're looking to relive that game a little bit. Unfortunately, the player base has dropped drastically, so if you do jump in, you might be waiting a bit to get into a match, but even with all that, it's still fun. Just make sure you're purchasing with caution. The next game on this list, number 14, is Commander the Great War, which is one of the more least exciting looking games on this list. It kind of looks a bit more like Civ, but just like with Civ, looks can be deceiving. Underneath its boring looking art style is actually a pretty in-depth and intense World War I strategy game, covering the whole war from the invasion of Belgium to 1918. Kind of like the Civ leaders, you can play as actual World War I historical leaders, each one having their own set of strengths. From what we've seen on message boards and Reddit, the game is much better off with the unofficial Ots Blitz mod installed. It fixes some things that devs got wrong and makes the game way more fun. Also, according to the Steam listing, the devs actually aren't supporting this game anymore, and the last patch was released in 2015, so just take that into account before diving in. And at number 13, we're talking about the most recent Steel Division game. Released in 2019, Steel Division 2 is a historically accurate World War II RTS that focuses on the Eastern Front. The focus here is all about the battles and the warfare. Turn-based army management and real-time tactical battles leave you juggling 1,600 different types of units over 25 different map types. The different types of gameplay for battles gives you lots of options to play, along with online multiplayer and co-op. This is one of the better comprehensive packages of the strategy games on this list. It also looks damn incredible. The attention to detail in the battlefields and the vehicle units in particular really just make the game a joy to watch play out. Whether you want real-time or turn-based online or solo, with a friend or without, Steel Division 2 is incredibly fun and filled with choices. It's a lot to learn, but players think it's tons of fun once you really get it going. At number 12, while there are a lot of shooters on this list, there are some other genres of games that have taken a swing at the World War I and World War II setting. Company of Heroes is one of those series. It ditched the first-person shooter gameplay in favor of being a real-time strategy game, and it's a solid RTS. One of the coolest things about this game are its destructible environments. Stuff like buildings could be destroyed, thus dynamically changing the battlefield, making different playthroughs have some different variety. For an RTS, some of these battles get pretty intense too, with you taking part in some of the biggest World War II battles, such as the invasion of Normandy. All of this carried over into the sequel as well, which was just as good as the first one. There's also more of a focus on quick, short skirmishes and not a lot of the bigger battles and exploration that you get in other RTS games. This is definitely a must-play. Moving on to number 11, we have World of Tanks. We've talked about this one a few times in a few different videos. Actually, if you haven't seen it before, it's a free-to-play MMO that's all about tanks. I didn't know that there were tank people like there are trained people, but this game is a tank person's dream. They have different tanks from all over the world, but blowing stuff up in this game is a ton of fun, and the tanks are actually pretty historically accurate if you're into that kind of thing. Gonna be honest with you though, to me, a tank is a tank. It's big and metal and has a big-ass tube on it that can kill shit. But yeah, tanks are nothing. Tanks, but no tanks. Tanks a lot. Tanks for the memories. Well, thank you, Andy. Tanks. I'm sorry for all the bad tank jokes. And at number 10, we have IL-2 Sturmovik 1946. This is a flight sim series that started with humble beginnings in 2001 and is now a full-fledged series with add-ons and content compilations. We definitely recommend the IL Sturmovik 1946 pack, which compiles a ton of stuff. This is one of those man's man, your dad plays this game type of game. This is like a hardcore flight sim, but focus around World War II. There's freaking hundreds of planes that you can fly, meticulously recreated with loving attention to detail and history. There's campaigns with over 200 missions, alternate history stuff if you love diving deep, over 1,000 different paints to tweak your rides, and it's really just a massive flight sim game series. It's pretty much the definitive World War II flight sim by a country mile. It's gotten tons of support over the course of many years, and it definitely shows. And at number 9, with Day of Defeat, this 2003 game was originally a Half-Life mod, which of course, as you guys probably already know, Half-Life mods have a good track record in video game history. Valve put it out as a real thing, a World War II shooter, and people loved it, and it was eventually remade in Source. It was a squad-based shooter, all multiplayer focused, where players play on either the Axis or Allies side. It's all European theater focused. It had 15 maps, and it was simple, solid fun with good weapons that had heavy recoil, and you couldn't really fire while running or jumping, unlike many other competitive shooters at the time. There are class differences, decent Valve support, and just a nice competitive spirit all around. It's an important and often forgotten area of video game and Valve's history. And at number 8, we have Red Orchestra 2 Heroes of Stalingrad. This was a highly realistic first-person shooter from 2011. People still play the hell out of this game too, man. It's got bullet drop, realistic recoil, and an interesting health system. There's no regenerating health, and hits register differently on different body parts, resulting in fatal and non-fatal wounds where you have to worry about using medical equipment and managing blood loss with bandages. It's starting to age a bit visually, but it's still brutal, realistic, and depressing with some kick-ass music that really gets you in the mood. It's considered by many to be the definitive World War II multiplayer shooter, and there are small pockets of community out there that prefer this over any other modern big-budget World War games. Next, at number 7, let's get real hardcore and talk about Darkest Hour, a Hearts of Iron game. Originally released in 2011, this strategy game covers a lot. There are different scenarios ranging from 1914 to 1920 or 1933 to 1964, so this is a pretty comprehensive game as far as world wars are concerned. With the base game, there's the Great War scenarios and the Road to Another War scenario, and these are massive grand war campaigns. You manage land, the air, the sea, and all sorts of military units and vehicles within. You can manage the economies of nations, and you have complete freedom of when to act, when to retreat, when to declare war. If you're looking at gameplay and you feel overwhelmed, yeah, that's the point. These are big strategy games for extremely smart players willing to take the time to digest tons of information and manage it all with a cool head. There's also tons of mods and support from the devs that make this less of just a game and more of a whole different hobby altogether. It's really cool. If you've got the courage to take it all on, the learning curve is extremely steep, but it can be extremely fulfilling if you love history and playing around with it. Next up, at number 6, we have Valiant Hearts. Now, this one is a bit different. This World War I game isn't like other war games. It isn't a shooter, but instead it's a stealth, puzzle, and narrative-heavy game. It's more about the different characters you play as and how the war has affected them, which is a very nice change. If you're into historical accuracy, this is definitely up your alley as well, with the game throwing some pretty interesting facts your way as you play. It also has an amazing art style, with the French countryside being super colorful and the front lines being legitimately scary and dark and just not fun. It honestly is a very nice change of pace to have a war game that's more about the people than the violence. Valiant Hearts does a great job at showing you different sides of the story too, with you playing as a POW, a nurse, an engineer, a German soldier, and even a dog. I just think it's really cool to focus on the people rather than the violence or the conflict, and this is really just a wonderful time if you haven't already played it. And at number 5, there's no way we can talk about World War I and II games and not mention Battlefield. Starting off with Battlefield 1942, when this game came out in 2002, it was super impressive. Not only were you running around a decently large map and shooting dudes, you were also flying planes, driving jeeps and tanks, and it got really hectic. You felt like you were legitimately on a battlefield. Then there's Battlefield 1 that had a really fun multiplayer and also a breath of fresh air, seeing that the last few installments had all been modern combat. The campaign was also amazing and delivered these really good small adventures, each one with their own set of characters, taking place in different parts of the world, each with its own gameplay mechanic focus as well. Then there's the infamous Battlefield 5, which was already off to a bad start after its announcement trailer, but the game's executive producer tweeted that DICE would always put fun over authentic, and that's exactly what we got. A really fun multiplayer World War II shooter with some really cool maps and character customization. At number 4, the Sniper Elite series has been going strong since 2005 in terms of releases and the quality of each one. The big standouts for us though are definitely the 3rd and 4th releases. It's definitely best known for its kill cam, where it slows down and you see the bullet leave your rifle and you get to see a blast through your target's head with X-ray vision. Yeah, I know, it's awesome. The last 2 games opened up a bit more and gave you sandbox style maps, much like the Phantom Pain, but way smaller, so you could really tackle your objectives however you wanted to. But what we really appreciate about this game though is that it isn't your typical war shooter. There's actually some really cool stealth mechanics, and with its open level design, you get multiple ways to take down your targets, so they give you some room to play around. Also, they give you missions where you get to shoot Hitler in the balls and watch him explode with X-ray vision, and if that's not a huge plus, then I really don't know what is. At number 3, this next one is an easy one, but we have to mention all the World War II Call of Duty games, the ones that matter anyway. The big ones here for us are Call of Duty 2 and World at War. Call of Duty 2 was an Xbox 360 launch title, and I remember playing it for the first time, which was the first time I experienced HD gaming, and it blew me away at the time. I don't even want to know the amount of time I spent playing and replaying that campaign and its split-screen multiplayer. World at War is a super important Call of Duty release too because it gave us its zombie mode, and I'd argue that while other zombie modes have been good, none of them have been able to even come close to the one included with World at War. Maybe it's nostalgia, still, it changed everything. There's also Call of Duty 3 that I honestly barely remember, and then the more recent Call of Duty World War II, which was supposed to be a return to form for the series, but it just didn't quite hit the mark. It had a very enjoyable campaign, even though most of it is forgettable, and I'd love to see Infinity Ward take another stab at a World War II era Call of Duty game, especially after last year's Modern Warfare remake. Coming in at number 2, we have Medal of Honor Frontline and Rising Sun. Remember when this series was still awesome before we got those modern day boring shooting gallery games? Anyway, yeah, both of these games were great, and I remember them feeling super cinematic as well, especially with the Pearl Harbor level in Rising Sun, where I felt like I was Cuba Gooding Jr. shooting down planes during the attack. Yes, I am referencing the Pearl Harbor movie starring Ben Affleck and Cuba Gooding Jr. Get over it. Anyway, Rising Sun in particular was really cool because it focused mostly on the Pacific War, which isn't something you saw a lot in games, and it was really cool to experience it. Frontline did a good job with its mission variety. It wasn't always just kill enemy soldiers and move up. There were some rescue missions, stealth missions, and a mission where you actually got to infiltrate a German U-boat. There's no denying how awesome that is. I would love to see this series come back, but stick to what it was and not what it eventually turned into. And finally, at number 1, we have to talk about Brothers in Arms. The whole series is worth talking about, but we're going to focus on Hell's Highway. First off, if you're looking for a World War II story, you've come to the right place. Hell's Highway is a continuation of the last game and has a lot of the same characters, and its story is right up there with some great World War II movies. You actually get attached to these characters and care about what happens to them, which isn't something that's common in a lot of the other games on this list. Its combat is also very different as well. Yeah, it's a first-person shooter, but there's a tactical element to it. You're in control of a few different squads, and you're dishing out orders to them. Different teams have different strengths, so you have to, put some thought into how you actually direct them. It also does the third-person cover system thing that I'm a big fan of, similar to games like Rainbow Six Vegas and Deus Ex. This is definitely one of the more unique and standout games on this list, and it is well worth your time. Before we go, there are some quick bonuses that we definitely want to talk about. First up, Assassin's Creed Syndicate has a surprise sequence in World War I where you work alongside a younger Churchill, and it's really cool. And the same can be said for Death Stranding, where there are both World War I and World War II scenarios. There's also a thing in The Darkness, where it's not at all a war game, but it takes you to World War I anyway. And Conker's Bad Fur Day has a really cool World War II section as well, which is pretty much a Saving Private Ryan scene, seeing that the game rips off a ton of different movies. And finally, we have the Saboteur, which had a really cool art style where areas that were controlled by Nazis were all in black and white, and color was restored once control was weakened in that area. And those are some of our best World War I and World War II games, but we want to hear from you, so meet us down in the comments and let us know what you think. As I'm sure you already know, hitting the like button really helps us out, and if you're new here, subscribing is a good idea because we put out videos like this every single day. As always, thank you for taking the time to stop by and hang out with us. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.